Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. And I was telling the viewers that I was on the internet last night going over and searching for any information that I could get on H Holmes, which is his AKA. His real name is Herman Webster Mudgett. And I had got so much information. I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't stop reading it. And it's unbelievable. So, Jeff,
tell us about yourself.
Yeah, tell us, Jeff.
I was I'm a middle American, fairly normal. Grew up in California, Navy family. Went to college, did a little normal occupation. Went back to school and got a law degree and practiced admiralty law in San Francisco and Los Angeles Harbor. And one day had a surprise about who I was as a man, and that led to writing a book, and that's what we're here about tonight.
And how did you get this surprise?
Well, and I'll backtrack a little. The initial chapters of the book describe the relationship I had with my grandfather, who was a very stoic, smart, intelligent man. He was the head engineer at the PG&E plant in Paso Robles, and the man loved to fish. On the weekends he'd fish when he had time off. I love to fish. Can you imagine having a grandfather or a grandmother, if you put yourself in that position, that never invited you fishing? And each time he didn't, your hatred for the man grew larger and larger. So I explained that in the book, and that relationship I had with this man who, at the end of his life, was himself cursed with 2 or 3 different types of cancer. And when he passed away, he was very wealthy. His entire will was 1 paragraph, and in it was a tackle box, which he left to me of all his grandchildren and sons and daughters. That tackle box was given to me by my father about 5 or 6 years after my grandfather died, and it sat in my garage. I just couldn't bear to have anything to do with the man even when he was dead. Well, finally one evening I went out to the garage, and I explained this in the book, and went through his fishing gear after my mom had explained to me that was his way of taking me fishing fine. Turned it over, went through it, was amazed with it, and at the end of the night, at the bottom of the box, the story is about me finding some written material from the killer, H Holmes.
You found written material from him?
That's what the story's about, and I'll start right now explaining to your listeners. The book is characterized, and we did this for many reasons, including some of them legal. The book is characterized as fiction based on a true story. So when I tell people about the diaries of the killer, I tell them that's what my story is about. I let my readers and your listeners, after they finish with the book, decide what is true and what isn't, and that's as far as I go at this point. So now that we've done that,
Are you allowed to say what these documents were, or what the letters were?
well, they were diaries from the killer about his actions in life, about death, and they had never been seen before by anyone except my grandfather, who decided I was the next one to take possession of them. And that's how the story begins and unfolds.
Well, Jeff, how did your grandfather get the diary?
Don't know. I have no idea. There was never anything in them about that, and he never explained it to me. He never talked to me about the man. And the sole time my grandfather ever mentioned him or that name was at a family dinner. And my grandmother was a energetic woman who was convinced we were related to General Robert E. Lee of the Civil War. She hired genealogists. This was back in the early 70s, and spent a whole bunch of money trying to prove that fact. Well, after they'd eaten up about $20,000 of her money, they came to her and said that she probably ought to leave it alone, that our ancestor had been a horse thief, they called it, who had been hung. And that it was the past and she should move on. So we, most of us left it alone except my brother, who kept at it. And one day at dinner, the whole family gathered together. He brought it up and the name of this man, this Herman Webster Mudgett. Well, my grandfather, this, as I told you, this very quiet man, stormed up out of his chair so violently that the painting behind him fell from the wall as his chair slammed into it. He yelled around the table, pointing at each one of us, and finally resting on me, that name would never be mentioned in his house again, and he stormed out of the room. And that was the night I was first acquainted with my great-great-grandfather, Herman Webster Mudgett.
Now, did your grandfather ever use the other name H Holmes? And that when he ever talked about him?
No, never. I don't even know if he knew that name. He might have, but it was never brought up, and I never heard him use it.
Okay, so Jets, all right, so you know him as Herman Webster Mudgett. Well, how did you get connected with H Holmes?
Well, Noreen, he used at least 31 different aliases.
Oh, he did?
Yes, he didn't like Herman Mudgett. I would imagine after you've killed 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, you want to change names quite often. He liked H Holmes because, and he wrote about this, and so did the New York Times. He was fascinated with Sherlock Holmes. That was his...
That's what I thought.
That was his idol or hero, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
And he read everything he could get his fingers on about the English detective.
So what do you know about your great-great-grandfather's upbringing? How did he turn out to be the serial killer?
Well, that's an interesting, a great question, and you've got many authors before me who dedicated themselves to those historical facts, like Larson and Schechter, The Devil in the White City and Depraved. I had some comments about him when he was a boy. I did some research in New Hampshire, in the town of Gilmanton, where he grew up. He seemed to have been a decent child when he was young. His parents seemed law-abiding, strict. They demanded he attend school and do well. He was a brilliant student, and couldn't wait to get away from that little town. I was just there about 3-4 months ago in the summer, and it's just a gorgeous place. I don't know if you've ever been to New Hampshire, just a gorgeous place. His original town, his original house is still there, as is the church he and his family used, and the school that he taught elementary school in before he was able to buy the ticket and get out. Can you imagine? This monster taught elementary school in New Hampshire.
Wow. How old was he then?
Oh, I'd be guessing. It would be an educated guess, but I would imagine 19, 20.
Oh, really? Okay, so then from New Hampshire he went to Chicago?
No, from New Hampshire he spent some time he spent time all over the East Coast, New York, Boston, Detroit, a lot of time in Detroit. He went to school at the University of Michigan, and he went to medical school, where he received his medical degree, and had one of the highest recorded IQs ever tested there. He was a fine student, bored with it all, and couldn't wait till he got out.
Wow. Okay, so how old was he about then? How old was he?
I would imagine he was probably 21, 22 when he went to medical school. I don't have the exact date, but
Okay.
he never wasted any time. I doubt that he would have, once he made his mind up that he wanted to be a doctor, a surgeon, he would have gone right to it.
Okay, so what year was this?
Well, he was born in 1861, so if he would have finished college in 1880, 83 maybe.
So there's a correlation with Jack the Ripper. Are you?
Okay, you jump
I'm
ahead.
trying to get a timeline here.
The Jack the Ripper is in the summer of 1888 until December of 1888 when it stops, all right?
1888 is when the murders start?
The summer of, generally about the end of August or 1st of September. I'm trying to get the exact dates, but I think it's August is when the first two murders start, and they end in December. The ripperologists, the forensic scientists, that's who dedicate their lives to Jack the Ripper, pretty much think that the 5 murders are the Ripper killings. Anything after that is probably copycat.
Oh yeah, because there was quite a few. I got that off the internet that there were quite a few more killings after that possibly could be tied into Jack the Ripper.
Right, but one thing I warn you about Jack the Ripper, you can come up with a theory or an opinion on any issue or fact you want to believe in. It's an amazing place to have opinion sprout forth. So there's a saying, there are liars, damn liars, and another author who tells you he knows who Jack the Ripper was.
Well, yeah, and there was another fellow, too, that was claiming that his great-great-grandfather was Jack the Ripper. I had printed that off, but of course I can't find the print-off that I got.
Oh, there was an author maybe 2-3 months ago, the article was in the LA Times, and he was stating, he even had a forensic drawing, it was quite hilarious, that the Ripper was an Oriental. Which, if you know anything about England in 1888, it wouldn't have been possible. That just wouldn't have happened. So you can come up, like I said, they had theories where it was some of the royal family.
Right. Prince Albert. It was Prince Albert they thought might also be Jack the Ripper. And they also thought it could be a woman.
They thought it could be a woman. The latest, there's one right now about a Welsh surgeon who they think they have found the scalpel that they think they can prove was the Ripper's instrument. I don't know how they do that, but that's the latest. That's in London right now.
Yes, I found that on the internet as well. He claims it's his great-great-grandfather's medical tool, and how he could relate that to Jack the Ripper, I don't know.
Noreen, I dug through that like you did, trying to find out anything which might indicate that was the instrument. And I didn't come up with anything factual in all the reading I did, so I don't know where that's going.
Okay, so the murder. When did the murder stop? In December?
Yeah, generally December of 1888.
All right. Okay.
Which is funny because that ties in when the murder started up again in Chicago.
All right. So Jack the Ripper's murder started in 1888.
The summer of 88.
Okay, and ended in August they started, December they ended. And when did the murder start happening in Chicago?
Well, Chicago's a huge metropolis, so it's hard to say a murder stopped and started. But there is a friend I have who is maybe the world's leading student and teacher on H Holmes. His name is Mark Potts, and he's convinced he can prove that the Holmes type MO killings stopped that summer and started up again in January of 89.
Okay, so that's how. Okay, I couldn't get the connection. So you're saying that he left England and then came to the United States. That's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
He was fabulously wealthy. He was in the life insurance business and selling skeletons to medical schools across the country.
Right.
His skeletons his skeletons were known as the most pristine, and for reasons that we can get into later.
Well, I read that he's completely stripped the skeleton, completely, bone clean.
His building was a factory, and he would take them to medical schools. I would imagine there might still be some of his victims hanging in medical schools in our country right now.
Wow.
As a skeleton, used in the medical school.
Wow.
Maybe in the museum pieces, medical schools. I don't know how they work now with
Now, were his victims, because I thought they were just the women, were they more, from what I remember in England, I thought it was just the call girls that were
That was
murdered.
in England.
So just call girls in England?
The Ripper was prostitutes, right?
Okay.
Holmes was more interested in more of a virginal quality woman in America.
So he seemed to have changed when he started and came to America, then his, I want to say tastes changed to a different type of victim?
Well, and that's something that's puzzled me from the start. I knew we had, before we went off on the skeleton, I was going to tell you, he was a fabulously wealthy man who traveled a lot. For him to lay down cash price for a ticket on a luxury liner from New York to Southampton was nothing. He enjoyed the continent. He loved Paris. He was in London 3 or 4 times. One of the things that amazes me when I first started the book, I had a lot of circumstantial evidence. I used to practice law in court. I had a lot of circumstantial evidence indicating he could have been the Ripper, but I didn't have any direct evidence. And what I found was, when I started this, was that the English and Americans who were fascinated with the Ripper would immediately say, no, it's not H. Holmes, it can't be. And I would ask them, why are you so cynical about it possibly being him as a suspect? He's perfect for it. Everything about it is perfect for it. They would be building the murder castle for the World's Fair. He couldn't have been both places at both times. So I imagined that they had this thing in their head about travel then, and how it would have taken 30, 40 days to buy a ticket, get on a ship, a liner, and then go to London. Well, so I did some research with Canard lines. It was only 6 days across.
Oh my gosh.
He could have done it 2 or 3 times that summer and fall. I don't know if he did or not. I couldn't prove. He used so many aliases. I went to Canard and we checked through the passenger list, and there was no way you could establish the name he used. So I knew that it was going to be difficult for me to ever prove that he was the Ripper, even if, well, you saw it, Noreen, you probably saw on my webpage, we have forensic drawings.
Yes.
Comparisons to his black and white photographs, which I think are very similar. A lot of people don't.
Well, honey, I read also that they added a mustache to those pictures of Jack the Ripper.
Now, the mustache, if you go, that's wrong. If you go back to the eyewitness accounts of the killings, and there were eyewitnesses of the Ripper, they all mention, all is a big word, I shouldn't say that. Most mention a mustache like Holmes had.
Oh, okay, because one website that I did go to said that they added the mustache.
I've never seen that, and I would be surprised. That was a fairly common accoutrement for men back then too, of class and money, having that mustache.
You know, I saw some of the writings that he did, his letters that he had sent to the police department, and it was very feminine. The writings are very feminine, very swirly. Do you think maybe that's why they think it could have been a woman?
No, I don't have. To me, it would have been impossible for a woman. You're talking about, if we get off track a little bit, you're talking about when you take the original 2 murders, maybe the 3rd, They had pathologies done on them after the murders. And when you read those reports, and they're very detailed, the pathologists state that for a man to have murdered and then removed the organs like he did in 4 or 5 minutes time in the dark, in the fog, on those streets, afraid of being caught, without damaging other organs around the ones he took, would have taken a surgeon or someone with extreme medical knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's where I always fall back on Holmes. And you have people with theories that, oh, it must have been a butcher or it must have been the royal family. But when you go back to those pathological reports, there's no doubt that it has to be a doctor. That's why this Welsh surgeon is coming up handy too in London.
Now the murder.
Let me get back to.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Let me get back on the handwriting you brought up. So, I didn't have any direct evidence that Holmes could have been the Ripper. So, about 2 months after I put forth my book, I was contacted by this man named Mark Potts, and Mark showed me the comparisons he was doing of the Dear Boss and the From Hell Ripper letters with the memoirs Holmes wrote while he was in prison awaiting execution. And if you've seen them, if you've compared them, there are words and letters that are very, if not exactly similar. He went to the British Library, Mark Potts did. The British Library recommended a woman who did handwriting and graphology. Graphology is the study where they compare the form of handwriting and the way a letter was written and try to put that into the character of a person. It's used by companies. I don't know if it's accepted in court as far as evidence, but it's a fairly handy science. She came back about 3 months ago and said that there was no doubt in her mind that the 2 letters and the words in it matched the words in the memoirs that Holmes wrote while he was in prison.
Really?
And that would have been 6 years later. We put that forth. Mark took that to London. Now, all of a sudden, we have evidence, direct evidence, that doesn't prove Holmes was the Ripper, but he could not have written those 2 letters from New York with the dates in between and the knowledge in them. He would have had to have been in London at the time of the murder. So now, all of a sudden, we're putting this in the face of the Ripperologists and the London community that, listen, not only do we have all this circumstantial evidence about Holmes possibly being the Ripper, but now we can almost assuredly prove he was there. Now, for you to say, no, he can't possibly be the Ripper when he was there in London is getting pretty foolish, because that's what this man did wherever he went. He killed people.
But Jeff, honey, the murders that Jack the Ripper did, yes. he like took their innards out and ovaries and all that stuff. But when Holmes killed, he did it in another manner.
Well, Holmes had a factory to do it, and a building in London. He was doing it on the street next to these buildings in the fog at night. You bring up a good point. I don't know why he would have been doing it like that. You'll know when you read my book.
I have to. I can't stand it.
Well, for anyone, including myself, to try to predict the mind of this evil monster, this brilliant thing, is ridiculous. None of us could do that. Why he would have acted like that in London, I'm not sure. I don't know. It gives somebody from the FBI the chance to say, see, Mudgett, that's not an MO. He couldn't possibly be the Ripper. Okay. So what we've done now is we've taken the handwriting and the memoirs and we've offered it to the University of Buffalo, who has come up with a computer program they developed for the post office to help in sorting of mail. This machine is supposed to prove with 96% accuracy if the handwriting is the same.
Really?
96%. I can't get the professor to agree to do it yet, but I'm going to keep on him until he does.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I think if they could get the Jack the Ripper case solved, it would really make a big difference, because everybody, their whole focus is Jack the Ripper, and if they could get that solved, it would be fabulous. I think it would be great.
Well, it's modern mankind's greatest mystery, and it's when you go on Google, the numbers Google tells you that the number of hits per month still on Jack the Ripper is huge. It's astronomical. People are still fascinated with that story.
They are.
So if we can get that machine to say, hey, the same guy wrote all three, then I've asked the American Institute of Mock Trials if they will allow me to conduct a trial in front of a federal judge and 2 criminal prosecutors with a jury and full rules of evidence on TV to conduct a mock trial if whether Holmes was the murderer of those prostitutes in London. And I think it would just be a fascinating story. I just can't wait.
I totally agree. Now, when Holmes was arrested and he was in jail, he wrote some of this stuff down. Why didn't he say anything about being Jack the Ripper in London, do you think?
Oh, he talked about being in London. He talked about reading papers. There was nothing fascinating him about these killings, these murders, for obvious reasons. He did it wherever he went. He didn't know the fascination that would overwash humanity 100 years later when he did them, if he did them.
But do you think, because you talk about in London he killed differently than when he came to America, do you think he was embarrassed from his first killings that he wouldn't talk about that?
I don't think he was ever embarrassed in anything, to tell you the truth.
Huh.
It wasn't who he was. He didn't mention much about what he did in London. He didn't write about it at all. There's a lot of conjecture on my part, and like I say, that's one thing I try to tell people who aren't in the law. Many homicides in our criminal justice system are solved with circumstantial evidence. As much as I have here about Holmes being the Ripper, the beyond a reasonable doubt does not require absolute proof, and that's what the Londoners are requiring me to show right now. Absolute proof that Holmes was the Ripper. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to prove it under our criminal justice system beyond a reasonable doubt, and I think I can do it.
I hope you can. It's absolutely fascinating to me. But the thing is that also fascinates me is the way he was committing murders in that so-called castle. Why did he call that place a castle?
I don't, that's a legend. I don't know if he ever called it a castle or not. I know the people around the locales called it the castle after a period of time. They might have called it the castle after they found out what was going on there. I'm not sure if I know the answer to that, or even if Larson or any of the authors do.
And so he got this building from, it was a pharmaceutical building? There's a great chapter in the book about him finding a want ad for a pharmacist. He had his medical degree. He had already planned out, and this is the most fascinating thing about the whole story, Noreen. He knew about the World's Fair. He had planned out the transportation system that would be needed to feed the World's Fair. He knew that there would be 20, 30, 40,000 people a day visiting this place from all over the world, including beautiful young ladies who had come from their families and homes and were on their own. Yeah.
Without any ability to contact their mom and dad or the police or anything like that. Holmes knew this.
Yes.
He planned the place he wanted to build his castle, his murder factory, at Junction Grove, which is now Englewood, Chicago. Junction Grove is known that because it's where the train from downtown Chicago travels south and then meets the 90 out to the river where the fair was built. Before the fair was even started, Holmes had planned what he was going to do. It was like if you imagine a lion on a mountain over the savannah watching the antelope, all right? He planned it from the start. That's what makes him the worst by far in the history of man. You can talk about Hitler and Stalin and those people, and yeah, they killed millions of people, but they did it with a uniform ordering another soldier to do it. This man created this place using his imagination and strategy, a chess game of murder. He found out that there was a pharmacy across the There was a want ad for a job. He went in. The owner of the pharmacy was sick upstairs. His wife was running the show. She was having trouble filling a prescription. Holmes walked in with the want ad in his hand, asked her to move aside, filled the prescription. She hired him on the spot.
Yes.
The man soon died. Whether he was ill or whether he was murdered, I'll leave that to you.
Oh, good hey, I never thought about that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Oh my God, you probably killed him.
Right, but that's the type of thing. That's the type of thing which doesn't allow you to write it in.
Third time it's done.
And I don't want to call it nonfiction, but I'm pretty sure he murdered the owner. Then he had a way of mesmerizing women and everyone around him. She soon had this crush on Holmes. I don't think it was a love affair, but a crush. She mentioned him in her will, and then she died. He bought the property across the street and started the construction of the murder castle.
Now, this murder house, is that the picture that you post, and you have it kind of comparable to the Burlington Hotel in Port Costa?
Yeah, it's on the Bloodstains Facebook page, and I welcome all of your listeners to go there. There's some great pictures. Before we go off any further, I'll give you an example of the investigation we've been doing. The Larson wrote in The Devil in the White City that the building had been burned to the ground after the hanging, turn of the century. That never made sense. We found a picture of the murder castle erect with a 1934 Ford pickup next to it, which is obvious proof that it wasn't burned to the ground. So what happened with that building was, after he was quote unquote hung, the building was owned by a number of people. I don't know if you want to go into it with your listeners what was down inside the building.
Oh yeah, I want to hear it.
Okay. When Holmes was arrested, the citizens had fears about the building for a long time. It had a main floor pharmacy and bar. It had a second floor hotel, a luxury hotel, and a third floor was Holmes's living quarters. Well, the basement was where he said he conducted medical and pharmaceutical experiments.
In the basement? I thought it was on the upper level.
On the basement.
Oh.
It was called the torture basement. And when the police investigated it after he was arrested, they found the most horrifying place maybe known to man, with acid baths, with urns to burn flesh, with stretchers, with rooms for surgery and torture, like crops of skeletons and organs that he would sell. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, and that's where the legend started and was talked about in the New York Times, the Chicago papers, the Philadelphia papers during the time of that trial in 1896. And when you go back on the Google and search for anything H. Holmes, you'll get to read all of those original newspaper articles, and they're just fascinating. I wrote about many in the book, as did Larson in The Devil in White City.
You know, On the web too, it also states, not on your website, that he repeatedly changed builders during the initial construction to ensure that...
Larson did a great job explaining that. What he knew that if he kept a contractor around too long, they would figure it out. So what he'd do is he'd hire a different one for each individual piece of labor, and then he'd fire them and bring another one in, and and it worked. His theory worked. None ever realized what he was doing except for 3 or 4 who disappeared. And I think there is no evidence to indicate what happened to them, but it's pretty easy to guess that they grew to know too much, and he did away with them.
So how long did he do this for?
How long, what was the period?
He was building, I think, it's scattered, the estimates, but I think it was at least 2 years before it was finished, and it was during the period of the early 1888, maybe to 1890. I'm not sure exactly, I don't remember exactly what year the fair started, but he had it.
The fair was in 1893.
Okay, so then he's probably started about 1888 and worked for 2 or 3 years on it before it was finished. And there's another, you just brought up a great point, Noreen. With the year you say that the fair started, for the Londoners to say it couldn't have been Holmes because he was building this hotel is pretty ridiculous.
Oh, no, the timing's right. The timing's right. And then, okay, so then he got married. Now, did he have any...
He was married long before that. He was married in New Hampshire.
Oh, when in his teen, like 19 or 20?
Yeah, and he
Really?
married my great-great-grandmother, Clara. And that's, Holmes probably had many children. I'm the legal one, if that makes a difference.
Oh, okay,
But,
yeah.
Yeah, my great-great-grandmother, Clara, had a baby boy. They separated. Holmes was tired of her. He left her alone for a while, and about years later he went back and asked her for a divorce, and she refused. And he decided that he allowed her to live. He must have had some sentiment involved, but he let her live out her entire life. And my father knew my great-great-grandmother well, and she moved out to California eventually and lived, Noreen, right across the river from you in Vallejo.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Jeff knows the area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Holmes's wife, they stayed married, but evidently Holmes had many lovers, and he would take out life insurance on each one of them.
Life insurance, sorry to interrupt you. Life insurance was his business. There were years before the turn of the century, Noreen, when he was making over $300,000 a year.
Oh my God.
I don't know how that equates to modern day money, but I would imagine it's very big.
Oh yeah, a lot. I wonder how he got away with doing. I know he sold life insurance, but I guess in those days there weren't the rules or regulations that we have today, because he didn't even know these people, and he was taking out life insurance policies and then collecting on them.
Well, like I say, he was brilliant. He was a doctor. His signature meant something then as it did now. I would imagine he had the system down. He had 2 or 3 full-time assistants, men who were, in essence, slaves, who would do anything for this man. I still haven't figured out how he was able to get people to do that. It's a Svengali-like thing.
And now his big thing on his victims is he would torture them. That's what he liked to do. He enjoyed torturing his victims.
He was fascinated, and I write about it in the book, and that's one of the things when I ask someone to buy the book and come along with me on this journey is Holmes was fascinated with the human condition to see what he could make them do under pain or duress. And imagine being in the hands of maybe the most incredible theorist and scientist of torture that ever lived, who practiced it repeatedly and who wanted to get you to admit that, well, things like whether you believed in God or not, or whether you would have sacrificed your daughter to ease the pain when he was cutting off pieces of your. I don't imagine.
Wow.
You can imagine the worst. That's what his hobby was.
Well, there were two little girls that I read about. Now, were those two little girls his partner's daughters?
They were the Petzels, I think
Yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah,
and
the two daughters.
That was his number one handyman who would supervise the building of the murder castle when Holmes wasn't there. And you're right, at the end, and I still don't know why quite exactly, but he killed Petzel and the man's daughters.
He killed the wife too, didn't he? He killed the man, the wife, and then he took the two daughters, and what he did to them, can I say what what I read on the website?
No, go ahead. My book doesn't carry much about the murder of the daughters because I wanted it to be more about, what I was trying to determine who I was after finding out this was in my background. But Larson did a great job in The Devil in the White City. Go ahead and bring it up.
Okay, what he did, he took the two little girls, I think, what 8 and 10, I think, something like that age.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and he took their clothes off, he stripped them, and they said he must have had sexual relationships with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had a big trunk, and he turned it into a gas chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And he put the two little girls in this trunk, and then he closed the lid, and that's how
Gassed
he killed them. Yeah.
Did they suffocate or he gassed them?
Well, I guess he gassed them. He
Well-
said he turned it into a gas chamber.
Wow.
He was asphyxiating gases, and he had a couple of rooms in the hotel at the murder castle where he could rent someone that room and then control the amount of gas he put into the room later when they were asleep and kill them.
So you were talking about people in the town there. They must have known things were going on. So what, I just can't believe that he was able to do this so long and people just kind of knew something but didn't do anything about it.
Well, and that's one of the things I tell people, that this is not a normal killer. This is not, a John Wayne Gacy type. This is someone who could control the human mind, who the people around him thought they were lucky to have him there.
Wow.
This was the local doctor in town who would take care of their sickness, who would come to their house to see how their children were, and then could flip the coin and go completely the other direction. Now, one thing you said, Noreen, I want to dispute. There was some talk about him having the sexual issues and rape. I don't believe he ever raped a woman. He never had to. When he was at trial, I'll give you an example. When he fired his lawyer, he conducted his own defense. They still talk about the methods he used in trial at law schools in America today. They were incredible. He would have been a fantastic lawyer. He lost the case quite handily. The evidence was overwhelming. But as he was led from the room after the verdict had been read, 6 or 7 women in the crowd stood up and openly bawled. It was written about in the New York Times that the man they still love, even though they knew he had murdered multiply, was being led away to prison. So the rape part about the children, I'm not sure if I agree with that.
Oh, I had read that.
Well, he sounds a lot like Manson, Ramirez, that type of an individual, where women still are crying. They know this guy is killed, but they still love him. I mean, look at Manson. He had girls following him forever, still do.
And I don't know if anyone will ever be able to explain why that is, but you're right.
Wow.
Yeah, they said the majority of his victims were women, and then there were also included some men and children. Wonder how many more children he killed.
Well, yeah, I think the men were mostly for money, or when they got in his way, or when there was a marriage involved and he was interested in the wife.
Wow. Now, he got discovered because they wanted to do a building inspection. Is that how that happened?
That's the first I've heard of that. What did you hear about that?
I thought I read that some people wanted to come in and do some kind of an inspection, and he wouldn't allow it, and then somebody got suspicious and called the police on him.
Okay, I heard that he was arrested because of a suspected horse stealing in Arkansas.
Okay, I didn't read that. I didn't read that.
So that's what brought him down, was horse stealing?
That's the legend. Now,
Wow.
there's so many legends to this story, and obviously when you think about, look at the false stories we get in the news today and all the electronics media we have,
Right.
and then go back then to where there was nothing except people's mouth to mouth and then the hand to paper. I don't know what I believe back then, but I heard it was a horse stealing.
Did anybody ever get away? Any of his victims, did they ever get away? Did they ever have a report of somebody? Because usually someone got away and...
Well, like the women in trial, that he allowed them to live. He allowed my great-great-grandmother to live.
But they didn't know he was a killer.
Yes, they did.
Oh, you mean that she did?
I don't know if my great-great-grandmother did. I would be surprised
She
if
must
she didn't
have.
know something was up. Yeah.
Yeah, she must have. I mean, she didn't say anything for fear of her life and her child, but she must have known something.
She was a very crafty woman. I would, obviously we're guessing, but you think about yourself as a woman and knowing a man that you loved, but that you knew had a bad side to him. It's pretty easy to come up with those instincts, isn't it?
Well, it is, and back then women had no rights. So, I mean, she maybe felt like nobody would listen to her, maybe.
Now, you weren't even allowed to vote back
Right.
then.
So you were property.
Yeah.
We were property.
Yeah. Now, he also did abortions?
He made a lot of money doing abortions, and that was another favor that the community considered, because evidently there was quite a few young ladies that needed that help back then.
Prostitutes, probably.
And
I
others.
don't know. I don't know.
Wow. And did he claim to be the devil?
He did. He wrote about that, and you can pick that up in some of the articles, his memoirs, which I write about in the book, Noreen, and you one day, if you get into the book and enjoy it, you can follow a couple of my paths traveling around the country finding out. When I wrote this, I didn't want to do what other authors had done, like, how can you write a chapter about the post office basement now, where the post office has been built on top of the murder castle with some of the existing foundation from the murder castle still there? How can you write about and not go down into the basement? So what I did was I tried, anywhere there was anything left remaining about Holmes, I tried to go visit. So when you read, there's a chapter about going to the Library of Congress, going into the rare book division. They make you put on gloves. They put you in a room with a camera. A man brings in a book, and it's one of the original editions of Holmes's memoirs. And
Wow.
that or three days and read them. Yeah, quite fascinating.
Wow. So, how did this change you? You got this tackle box and came across these memoirs or these letters. How does that change you as a person?
I'm glad you asked that, because the book has layers. It has many layers for different types of people. It appeals to different types. Many people, mostly the men, are fascinated with the story about how I'm going to prove he was the Ripper, or that he wasn't actually hung, that the guard was hung in his place, how I'm going to prove that true one day, how when we excavate the post office when it's closed, all these historical facts I've put in the book based on what Holmes wrote and I read, I'm going to be able to prove those things. Most of the men are interested in those factual matters. Most of my market, though, is women. I'd say 80% of my readers are women. And they're more interested in the journey I went on after having found out that, well, think about it. You wake up one day when you're 42, 43, and the night before you've been told that your great-great-grandfather, direct ancestor, was the most evil man that ever lived. Everything you've done, every instinct you've had, every violent urge that has come over you, all of a sudden needs to be inspected in those lights. And that's what my life became, trying to figure out, well, think about it. unless he was who he was, the evil, I wouldn't have existed, because I owed my existence to actions he took. And it changes the way you look at life. It changes the way you look at God. It changes the way you look at your future and your children. And my life became an obsession trying to learn what it all meant. So when I ask someone to buy the book and read it with me, I ask them to come on the journey with me, because it's not buying a book, it's like buying a ticket. And all of us, when you think of those things, because you know what? I'm the one that got to identify this evil thing in my background, but if all of us were able to look back far enough, Noreen, you'd find someone, your co-host would find someone that had done something dastardly, and it's all about the choices we make as human beings, whether or not we have this blood staining our soil, and that's what the title of the book's about, Bloodstains, Stain of My Soul.
So why did you want to make it, why did you go public with it?
That's the best question you can ask me on the interview. When my whole family, after the trial in Philadelphia, they moved west to escape the stigma. They moved to California. Back then you could do that. No one knew who a Mudgett was in California. They kept it secret. My grandfather kept it secret from his wife until that night at dinner. My grandmother didn't know either.
Well, how did you... Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. I just want to know, how did it leak out that he was a Mudgett?
Well, I told you when my grandmother hired those men to look into seeing if we were related to Robert E. Lee, they said, no, you're related to this horse thief. Well, my brother kept looking into it, and he figured out with the books that had come out, and the way the electronic media was upgrading its ability to project facts, it was a lot more than a horse thief. It was this killer, this serial killer, the first one they ever called serial killer, the first one they ever called psychotic.
Yeah.
And so when I came up with this material and my family found out I wanted to write this book about this thing in our background, they were all quite upset. They wanted me to leave it alone. They wanted me to do what the family had done for 100 years, to run away and hide from it. And I refused to do that. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to see what it all meant. And I wanted to be able to tell the world, after they read my book, that my family, my father, my grandfather, his father, myself, even though we had this in our genes, in our genetics, in our physical makeup, that we had made choices to be God-fearing, law-abiding people that weren't criminal. And to me, that was something to be proud of, to tell the world. And after a couple of years, my family has agreed, and now they're all quite happy that I wrote them.
Oh, good. So you were telling me something about epilepsy. You have epilepsy? What happened?
Yeah, that's an interesting part of the story. When you read about Holmes, you'll realize that the papers, after they thought he was hung, they came up with something called the Holmes curse, and it was written about across the entire country. Anyone that was involved, anyone's too big a word, many that were involved in the arrest, the trial, and the execution of Holmes either died or had terrible misfortunes occur to them.
I read that.
So terribly that it was called the Holmes curse. Well, when I looked at that, instead of believing this supernatural, paranormal event, this that he had come back from the grave and visited the judge and the insurance adjuster, the lawyers, the people that testified against him, the warden of the prison, those people. I thought, what about if I believe what he's saying in writing about the events that occurred in his life.